we're going to go now to Donna Bodine's garden in El Cerrito. So Donna has a 750 square foot front garden and a parking strip. It's now 95% native. That's the before photo. Here's right after it was planted. And this garden was installed in 2008. And here's the photo now. So some of the interesting features about this garden, it's low maintenance. It's a drought tolerant woodland garden. Donna designed it and installed it with her husband, Jim. This garden has rooftop downspouts that discharge into a decomposed granite pathway, which overflows into the garden. So this retains rainwater on site. And the benefit to us as gardeners to do that is that keeping our rainwater on site keeps our garden green longer as plants can access the water that is stored in the soil. And it also helps to clean the water before it slowly trickles down into the groundwater or the bay. This garden has a number of fragrant plants such as native rose, coyote mint, pitcher sage, and Donna has seen flocks of oak titmice, which are on the Audubon Society's watch list, meaning they are in need of immediate conservation help in her garden. So now let's go to Donna in her garden. Hello, Donna, how are you?
Hi, Kathy. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying the garden tour and Dr. Talami's talk as much as I have. I'm going to reverse my camera view here. And my husband, Jim, is helping by holding up some before pictures. Here's one that Kathy just showed you. And I'll show another one here. This is what our property looked like in 2007 when we bought the house and we moved here. And mostly we were working with weeds in the form of a lawn. And on the other side of the driveway, you can see we had some juniper shrubs that needed to be removed. So we really had a clean slate to start with. And now I'm going to show you from a similar perspective what the garden looks like today. And we installed the garden in stages. I spent the first year we moved here really just getting to understand the site and think about my design ideas and formulate my design goals. Took a while. There's a lot of interesting microclimates happening here in the garden. So we installed the main garden in 2008 and then the largest parking strip in 2009. And then this area here where I'm standing closest to, you can see the manzanita on the left. That's an Ian Bush manzanita, by the way. That was the last area that I worked on. And that was installed in 2012. So we had just a, kind of a weedy lawn, and there were some soil compaction issues here because of how the space was used before. So I did, with my husband's help, Jim, we removed the weeds manually and we rototilled in a few inches of organic compost. And if I were designing the garden today, I'd probably use a sheet mulching technique. It's a really sustainable way to keep the organic matter and plants on site. And it's certainly a lot less backbreaking than rototilling. But overall, I'm really happy with how we prepared the soil and the soil quality today. Which is really the most important component when you're designing your garden and you want to have, long-term success. So in terms of the garden objectives, we have a street tree here. This is a non-native Chinese elm tree that forms a canopy over our garden. So we get varying degrees of different microclimates with different amounts of sun and shade to play with, which has been quite interesting and fun. So what this reminded me of is designing for an oak woodland habitat, as if this non-native street tree were actually a coast live oak. And I really fell in love with oak woodlands when Jim and we used to spend a lot of time hiking and fishing in Henry Coast State Park. And that's where I really first started to appreciate oak woodlands. So I wanted to really bring that feeling here to the garden. Here, I'll move up for a slightly different overview. Also, I wanted to use a coastal prairie plant community, which is really the plant community that was here before our neighborhood was built. So a lot of the plants that I selected come from that plant community. I'm in El Cerrito. We're very close to the bay. We're also right in line with the Golden Gate. So we are in the fog belt. I believe Mary mentioned her garden is zone 16. So my garden is in zone 17. And then another design goal was to infiltrate as much stormwater runoff on the property as possible. And as Kathy mentioned, we constructed a gravel path and we infiltrate our roof runoff into the path. The path is gently sloped away from the house and toward the garden. So the runoff will be kept on site, and we have some other features around the house like that. One, it's great to minimize runoff going into our local creeks, but also this is a great water conservation method for keeping water on site on your own property as water for your plants during our rainy season, which is really when our native plants need rain. And, we're very much behind average rainfall this year. And I think as drought and climate change continues, this is going to be a more important focus. We also reuse soil that was used to excavated when we constructed the gravel path to create some mounds in the garden. They're become quite subtle right now, but there's one in front of you. This increases stormwater infiltration, and also it adds some vertical interest in the garden, which just produces just a more interesting rolling look. So now I thought I would focus on some plants of interest, many of which are in bloom right now. And we'll start over here. I'm trying to get these grasses out of the way. So this is a creeping snowberry, and I'll just briefly explain these labels. I've got the name of the plant here, when it was planted here in the garden. Some of these plants are older, but this is when the plants came here. And then my local source, where I got the plants, and a lot of these are local native plant nurseries that are collecting from very local watershed regional sources. So I have that information here. And then there's been a lot of mention of Calscape, and I've got the Calscape quick reference codes here. It's a great resource. And my neighbors of all ages are walking by and using their phones to zoom in on these QR labels and get information about the plants. So that's been great. I will now focus in on these beautiful pink flowers. This is a great ground cover. This comes from the Tilden Park regional park area. This parking strip is in sun, at least where I am on the bay, but it's also establishing itself really well in the deepest shade parts of the garden. So it's a very versatile ground cover. Again, this is creeping snowberry. Now I'm going to move on to another plant. This is a great little annual. This is meadow foam. And I've got a label here that I'll focus on for a minute, and then I'll go back to the flowers, which are so beautiful right now. And this plant blooms really early, so usually it's not blooming for the native tour. So I'm really happy to be able to show it to you right now. And this is one of the most hardy self-sowers, an annual self-sower. It actually started in the main garden, but moved over here. This is really where it likes to be. And it's been self-sowing here for 10 years. And what's really needed to have self-sowing annuals, at least here, one, the annuals really need to be resistant to slugs because that's kind of an early death for our self-sowers. And also, when this plant dies back, I just leave it in place, and you really have to let the seed heads form. It's going to look a little bit messy, especially since it's right out in the parking strip. But this is really what's needed to get that self-sowing from year to year and produce this effect that is has a really natural quality to it. In the background, I've got some Salvia Bees Bliss, which I planted just about 3 years ago. And it's really just establishing itself quite well in partial sun, and it will bloom later. So now what I wanted to talk about are the grasses that I have. And hopefully this is a good shot so you can see where they're planted. My favorite grass to use in the landscape is California fescue. I've got many different species of California fescue out here. Californica, rubra, different strains of it. There's quite a bit of the Point Melati strain, which I really love. And they really self-sowed over time and mixed together. So I'm not really sure what all the different species are, but I think it's a really essential component of the coastal prairie look that I'm going for. Here, I'll move over and show a different angle so you can just see how the grasses are laid out here in front. And one issue that is becoming, I think, more and more of an issue is the use of grass and native plants in general, and how to balance that with our urban fire requirements. And cities more and more and fire marshals are imposing new requirements to prevent urban fires, which of course are extremely serious in California. This is not a high fire hazard zone. I just thought I would mention that. But what's happening is that earlier and earlier, I'm being required to cut back these grasses at a time where they normally wouldn't be getting cut back. So that definitely stresses them out. And I've lost some already because of that process. And I think that that is going to continue over time. So it's one thing to think about when you're designing your landscape and you want to incorporate these grasses. Generally, fire marshals are going to target them and require that you cut them back. So here, that really affects the whole design of the property, since they're a real component of how you walk down the sidewalk and experience the garden. All right, now I'll move on to a few other plants. I have mostly perennials that stay evergreen through the summer here, but here's an exception of a plant that goes summer dormant. This is a native delphinium, which is actually native to our local watershed right here in El Cerrito. I just love this delphinium. It's a very hardy one, and it hasn't started blooming yet, but I will go up to the tallest spike and show you what it looks like. It's also very breezy here today in my little microclimate compared to the other gardens that you've seen today, just FYI. And this produces lovely white flowers that the bees love. This is a very bee-focused habitat garden. I really designed the garden to attract native bees, also honeybees, but mostly native bees, and of course birds and other animals and beneficial insects. But this is really a bee-focused garden. Now I'm going to move on and show you another plant. This is a shrub. I'm showing this to you because this is kind of an unusual shrub to see in a garden. This is a California snowdrop bush or styrax. This is an old shrub, probably about 15 years old, and I started this from a cutting. This plant is native to the foothills, and it produces these beautiful nodding yellow and white flowers that are lightly scented, and the bees love them. In this picture, you can see the bloom, the full bloom, and then kind of a spent bloom. And this shrub blooms in March through April, so it's winding down now. And it's also a slow growing shrub. It's just about 6 feet tall and 7 feet wide. And I think it's maxing out at this height. So it's a lovely shrub, California snowdrop bush. Moving on, this is another shrub that works really well in the garden. This is a California bush anemone or Carpentaria. And in general, the shrubs that I have in the garden, even though they have a different form in terms of how they grow, they look very different. They all, or many of them, have white flowers. And that's a really good design technique. Here, I'll move on to another cluster of flowers. So pretty. A really nice design technique, especially here, I have about 50 different plant species in an area that's currently about 1,000 square feet. So using the white flowers really has kind of a calming, unifying, harmonizing effect, and I think it provides a place for the eye to rest. In its native environment, Carpentaria, I think, only is native to Fresno and Madera counties, and it's a chaparral plant. It's slow growing and evergreen. And what that means, chaparral means that it can tolerate a lot hotter and drier conditions than what we have here in foggy El Cerrito. So again, it's a great versatile plant. Again, this is an older shrub. It's been here since 2008, but lived in a pot on my porch for many years before I moved here. This is a really great plant, and although it's not very showy, this is called our bee plant or scrofularia, and this is one of the highest bee attracting plants in my garden. It does well in sun and shade. Let's see if I can get to a bee. I see a bee. Let's see if I can get there. There we go. Well, I probably will focus back on the plant, but you get the idea. I also have this in the backyard. I'm an urban farmer and I grow a lot of my own food. And if you integrate a lot of native plants, this one in particular, into your food growing operation, you will really boost your food production through pollination. So I have bee plant interplanted with boysenberries and blackberries, and it's really just a wall of bees, and it really does enhance your berry crop. So I highly encourage using this versatile plant. If you're hiking around in open space, you've probably seen this plant and maybe not thought much about it, but I'm a big fan of it. Let's move on. So right now, I really love checker blooms. This is Sedalia malviflora. This is the native species that comes from Brooks Island. I also have a cultivated variety in the garden called Perpeta that blooms later. But I just love these flowers. They attract a lot of bees. And I'm adding more and more of this to the garden right now. Just crazy about it. I'll just linger here for a minute. Okay, well, while I'm in this area, I thought I would show you one of the stormwater features that I have in the garden since we're right here. And I'll move along, and here's the gravel path. Here's just a really simple low-tech example of how we've routed our roof gutter downspouts to our gravel area. And like I said, we slope the gravel path away from the house so it can just infiltrate into the planted area. And I have quite a few of these features around the property. Here in the sun here by the house in a planter, I've got a hybrid mimulus. This is jelly bean orange. And I'll zoom in and focus on the flowers. This is a really bright orange mimulus. And there are so many hybrid mimulus. Even the species mimulus has a lot of, I guess, genetic variability. So there are a lot of people who are just crazy about hybridizing mimulus. I really like the way that the orange looks against the blue house. This maybe is more of a feature plant. I don't know how well it would blend into the garden, but I would suggest if you are adding mimulus, which I highly recommend, you might want to see what they actually look like in bloom before you add them because they are so variable. And its companion plant here is a fringe cup or Tolima. Has these beautiful little pink flowers. They're not very showy. This is a very classic oak woodland plant, and it does well here in a planter with a mimulus. There's a shot of that. Moving on, I thought I would show you a few plants that are in the understory of this ribes, but this is a lovely shrub. Sorry, this is a coffeeberry, not a ribes. This is the species variety, but there are a lot of other cultivated varieties that are available as well. This is more of the shrub is wider than it is tall. It's about 5.5 feet wide, but about 12 or 13 feet, 5.5 feet tall, but 13 feet wide right now. And under it are some really nice plants. There's some interesting things happening right now. Here's another, I'll show the label since it's here. Calico monkey flower. This is an annual monkey flower that I'm trying to establish now and get to self-sow. It's beautiful. Sorry, it's a little bit windy here today. Anyway, how I'm going to address that is I'm just going to let the seeds form and leave it in place. And I might collect some and start them in pots. And then the rest I'll just sprinkle in place and hope for self-sowing. Although I have noticed that slugs are interested in this plant, so I'm sure I'll have to take some slug protection measures. But this is just gorgeous, and I think everyone would be really happy to see this in the garden. It's a great little plant for an edging. And then in this understory, there's a lot of other things. There's some Phacelia and some bleeding hearts back here, some Dicentra. So it's a nice little kind of shady microclimate under the coffeeberry. This is another shrub. This is a California mock orange or Philadelphus lewisii. I'm going to get to the sign, which is very windblown, but I'll head over there. There it is. And this shrub is a real showstopper when it's in bloom. It's very fragrant. I guess it smells like orange blossoms, but I think it has kind of a more unique scent than that. This is the tallest shrub in the garden right now. It's about 10 feet tall, but you can control it and keep it to any height. by pruning. And I would say overall, it takes several years to get established, and then it really takes off. But even so, it's still a relatively slow growing shrub. And it's right by the front door. And it has a beautiful scent that's not overwhelming or overpowering whatsoever. I'll stand back maybe so you can get a better picture of the scale of the shrub. I just love it. I think I have one more plant to show you. I'll head over there. This is a tricolored gilio. I'll go to the sign and linger there for a minute. And trying to reestablish as an annual self-sower. I planted this when I first installed the garden, and I had great luck with it self-sowing for a few years. But then we started having our drought conditions, and I didn't realize that I needed to give the native garden supplemental water in the winter, especially to help those self-sowers. So it really I lost the gilly at that point. So I'm trying to establish them, coming back with a little bit more knowledge about how to keep them going. But they're very hardy, and slugs are not attracted to them. So in my garden, Gilia, the meadow foam, and of course California poppies, which are both annual and perennial, are the best self-sowers for annuals. And having a mix of self-sowing annuals and perennials and grasses gives this garden, I think, kind of a wild look that hopefully you do think looks like an oak woodland coastal prairie. And I don't actually have any other plants to present. If I have more time, I could, and it sounds like maybe I do, I will walk slowly over and show you an iris that just started blooming today that I noticed. So let me get over there. This is kind of special. It just started blooming today. Whoops, here we go. And this is a species iris. This is Iris macrosiphon. I don't have a sign out. I wasn't expecting it to be in bloom. I think I first saw this in Henrico Park. There are a lot of hybrid irises out there, so many. Most of them are very beautiful. I have quite a few. Most of them have already finished their bloom in the garden. But again, this is the species macrosiphon, and it's just lovely. I'll zoom in on that. And that's special because it's in bloom today just for the tour.
Okay, Donna, well, thank you very much. Thank you for your garden. It was beautiful.
You're very welcome. I really enjoy doing it.
So Donna is doing garden design and consulting. She's specializing in edible gardens and native plants. And in the backyard, which we're not seeing, she has a mostly edible garden that's interspersed with native plants. If you're interested in getting hold of Donna, you can just email me at the garden tour and I'll forward your email on. Donna, there may be some questions for you on YouTube if you feel like hopping on there afterward and responding to them.
I would love to.
Okay, Donna, thank you so much. It was nice to see your garden.
Thanks so much, Kathy, and thanks everyone. But goodbye.